Hello and welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show, brought to you by Tissot, the official timing partners of the Tour de France. Now this week, Jumbo-Visma and Jonas Vingegaard dominated the Tour de France, and I will be looking at his unconventional route to the pro peloton. I will also look back on history being made with the opening stage of the Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift, as well as a return to winning ways for Julian Alaphilippe. First up, the Tour de France Hommes. Now, if you had looked at this final general classification without watching any of the race, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it had been pretty boring. Jonas Vingegaard rode into Paris with more than a 2-minute 43-second advantage over Pogačar in second, whilst the gap of 7 minutes 22 to Geraint Thomas is the largest at the race since 2014. Now, it would have been the largest for 25 years had it not been for Vingegaard sitting up with his teammates yesterday. And likewise, you'll have to go back to 1997 to find a gap between first and 10th in excess of the 24 minutes and 52 seconds that separated Vingegaard from Adam Yates. Now, for just the second time in history, we also had 3 Tour de France winners fill the top 3 places on GC. Now, there wasn't much competition for the green jersey. Wout van Aert's first tilt at the competition couldn't really have gone any better. He took it on day 2, and that was the end of that. Basically, in the end, Van Aert amassed 480 points, which is a record for the competition since it's had its current point structure. He was so dominant, in fact, that his points tally was just 6 short of those racked up by the next 2 riders in the classification combined, that being Philipsen and Pogačar. Van Aert animated the race from start to finish and was invaluable in his help to Vingegaard along the way. Now, I've got to say, I loved the green bike he rode on the final stage with the Wout van Aert or Wout van Aert graphic on the seat tube, which incidentally, we've heard that that's what his bike will have written on it when he turns his incredible talents to BMX freestyle. Sorry. Terrible joke. Anyway, Pogačar dominated the young riders competition, beating Tom Pidcock by close to an hour. He has now spent a record 54 consecutive days as the leader of the white jersey classification, although obviously that's not really what he came to France for. But my word, hats off to Pogačar for the way he animated the race. In hindsight, I think we can say it's clear that Vingegaard was the stronger of the two, but Pogačar made the race exciting from the first day to the last, and you have to tip your hat to him for that. Ironically though, not winning the GC has almost undoubtedly won him more fans than a third straight win would have done. The tightest classification was the King of the Mountains. Poor Simon Geschke held the polka dot jersey from stage 10, only to lose it on the final mountain of the race to Jonas Vingegaard. And he was replaced on the final podium by a mannequin, just to add insult to injury. So Jumbo-Visma came into the race aiming for yellow and green and head home with yellow, green and polka dots plus 6 stage wins, which is not a bad haul, really. Now, despite winning the Tour de France, I do feel like we know very little about Jonas Vingegaard, the person. So let me fill you in a little bit. He spent 3 years with the Danish continental level team Colo Quick, but as much as his results, it was this ride that would catch the eye of Jumbo-Visma. So Jonas, led out by his teammates, took the Strava KOM on the Coll de Rates in southern Spain, a well-known testing ground for established pros. Vingegaard had already previously caught the eyes of those near him though, including Michael Volgren, who tweeted about his talent in 2016. But it was that KOM performance in 2018, as well as a win in the uphill prologue of the Giro Ciclistico della Valle d'Aosta Mont Blanc that same year, that caught the eye of Jumbo-Visma. 9 months later, he'd given up his job in a fish market and become a full-time pro in the World Tour. Now, it took Vingegaard a few months to establish himself in the professional peloton, but by August of 2019, he'd taken his first pro win, a stage of the Tour of Poland, ahead of Pavel Sivakov and Jai Hindley. And that was then backed up by second overall at the Tour of Denmark and another top 10 at the Deutschland Tour, all in the same month. Vingegaard was on his way. With the onset of COVID in 2020, Vingegaard didn't compete at his first Grand Tour until late 2020 at the Vuelta a España, where he rode in support of Primož Roglič en route to his second overall victory there. Now, thinking back, I do distinctly remember the slight and ghost-like figure of Vingegaard shepherding his teammate deep into the high mountains. His first stage race win came at the Coppi Bartali in April of last year. Another solid result, second at the Tour of the Basque Country behind Roglic, followed just a couple of weeks later. And it was only at this point, with Tom Dumoulin sidelining himself, that Jumbo added Vingegaard to their Tour de France long list. Second place on the final stage of the Criterium du Dauphiné was enough to seal his place in the squad, and a few weeks later, he was on the start line of his first ever Tour de France. Now, for many cycling fans, that was the first time we learnt about Jonas Vingegaard. When Roglic crashed on stage 3, Vingegaard was by his side, chasing hard for his teammate and finishing just under a minute behind the overall winner, Tadej Pogačar. Just a few days later, after Roglic's abandon, Vingegaard was thrust into the leadership role of the team. And his eventual second place was frankly remarkable, and when you consider he hadn't even been considered to be a part of the team just a few months earlier. Now roll on to 2022, and most of us were wondering what Jonas's role would be at the Tour de France. Jumbo came into the race with the publicly stated ambition of winning the yellow and the green jerseys, but would Vingegaard be a co-leader or, like last year, a fail-safe if something happened to Roglic? Now, we did have an indication at the start of stage 5 when Vingegaard's spare bike was placed in the most easily accessible position on top of the team car. And if that didn't answer our question, the leadership was decided on the road that day. Vingegaard had a mechanical, but Roglic crashed and lost more time than the Dane. And the rest, as we now know, is history. From the moment Vingegaard took the yellow jersey on that epic stage to Granon, he never looked in trouble, despite a barrage of attacks from Pogačar at every opportunity he'd had. Vingegaard is without doubt the deserving winner of the Tour de France, the best and most consistent climber with the strongest team to back him up. The biggest question that we now have, though, is what next for Primož Roglic? The pretender to the throne is now comfortably sitting on it, which potentially puts Roglic and the team management in a difficult situation. Roglic, you'd imagine, won't want to go to the Tour de France playing second fiddle, whilst Vingegaard would well be within his rights to expect sole leadership. So who knows? Maybe Ineos might think of swooping in and buying Roglic out of his contract. That was rumoured on the Dutch website Wieler Flits yesterday, and I'll be very interested to see how that pans out over the next few months. Now, on the subject of Roglic, rumours circulated on Friday that new scans had revealed 2 broken vertebrae from that stage 5 crash. As far as we can see, though, those rumours have not been confirmed by the team, but if that is the case, it's surprising that he managed to continue as long as he did, and especially play such a pivotal role in cracking Pogačar on stage 11. There is no doubt he'll be back, it's just a case of when, and we wish him all the best in his recovery. What about Ineos Grenadiers then? Just a couple of years ago, a third place overall would have been a huge disappointment for them, but I think they'll be relatively pleased, and certainly should be, with Geraint Thomas's third place. Tom Pidcock's win on Alpe d'Huez as well, plus the team's classification to boot. In his final press conference, Thomas talked of his satisfaction in silencing the doubters, and it appeared he was talking not only of doubters in the media or the general public, but also within his own team. So finishing on the podium of the Tour de France is definitely no mean feat at any age, but at 36, Thomas has a lot to be proud of. That said, I do wonder what was going through his mind at times in the mountains. It looked as though he had a front row seat to watch a completely different race between Vingegaard and Pogačar. But fair play to him, I don't think many would have predicted that result a few months ago. In terms of sprinting, if you discount Van Aert, who didn't win a bunch sprint, the most successful was Jasper Philipsen. After inadvertently celebrating second place behind Van Aert on stage 4, he finally got his win on stage 15, although forgot to celebrate, and then backed that up with the most prestigious sprint win of them all on the Champs-Élysées, where it took him quite a long time to celebrate. And it wasn't even close. He crossed the line lengths in front of Dylan Groenewegen. Groenewegen and Jakobsen do at least go home with a single win apiece. Poor Caleb Ewan has had a Grand Tour season to forget. 8th place yesterday was his best result of the entire tour. Arguably, the most memorable stage win of the race, though, was that of Ugo Ule. The Canadian lost his brother to a hit-and-run drunk driver 10 years ago, a story that many of us were unaware of until his win on stage 16 into Carcassonne. And his emotional celebration and post-race interview had us all emotional, and what better tribute could he have paid to his late brother, Peric? Congratulations once again to Ugo. So, The Tour de France Hommes is over for another year, but the great news is that there's no feeling of emptiness, no black hole in the week that follows, because we have the Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift. The race kicked off yesterday in Paris, ahead of the final stage of the men's event, with an 82-kilometre stage from the Eiffel Tower all the way to the Champs-Élysées. Emily Newsom and Misha Bredevold were the first two riders to get away, but they'd already been caught ahead of the first intermediate sprint. There, Marianne Vos made her green jersey intentions clear, out-sprinting Lorena Wiebes to the line to pick up maximum points. Both appeared content not to contest the next sprint though, which was won by Lotte Kopecky. Soon after, the only QOM of the stage, Femke Marcus took maximum 2 points, ensuring a trip to the podium for her and her team Park Hotel Valkenburg. Gladys Verhulst of Le Col Wahoo was the next to attack, carving out an advantage of over half a minute over the peloton. Team DSM were not going to let this opportunity slip through their hands though, and they set to work on the front to bring her back. Lorena Wiebes started the day as the red-hot favourite, but she was well out of position coming into the last kilometre. However, some sterling work from her teammates got her out of trouble, and in the kick to the line, she had little trouble getting the better of Marianne Vos and Lotte Kopecky. Wiebes, frankly, makes it look easy, but with that pressure on that stage, it must have been anything but. She is, though, just a head and shoulders above every other female sprinter out there at the moment. There have been reports circulating in the Dutch press that Wiebes is set to join SD Works next season and become the highest paid female pro cyclist in the process. And you've got to say, she deserves it. Her win yesterday was the 16th of her season so far from just 32 days of racing. Now, one of those was the general classification at Ride London, but even so, that is effectively a 50% strike rate, almost unprecedented in the modern era. The Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift continues today with stage 2, and we are enormously proud that we have live coverage of every single stage on GCN+, along with pre and post race shows every day with Orla, Adam, Danny Christmas and Danny Rowe. Now, territory restrictions do apply there, though, it has to be said. The race will conclude on Sunday atop La Superplanche de Belleville, but before then, we've got a little bit of everything, including some gravel on stage 4 to Bar-sur-Aube. Now, check out the GCN app for daily stage timings and also for free-to-view daily previews and a whole load of other content around the race. Beyond that, on Saturday, it's the next round of the Men's World Tour with the Classica San Sebastian. That one is available live in Europe, the US, Latin America and Asia Pacific, excluding China, Japan and New Zealand. Apologies once again. If the provisional start list is to be believed, it's going to be a star-studded field full of the riders who've animated the men's Tour de France, plus former winners Julien Alaphilippe, Remco Evenepoel and Alejandro Valverde. Now, talking of Alaphilippe, he was back to his winning ways on Saturday at the first stage of the Tour de Wallonie in what was just his second race since that awful crash at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. Alaphilippe powered up the Mur de Huy, the finishing climb at La Flèche Wallonne, crossing the line a second clear of Alex Aramburu and Robert Stannard. On stage 2, the bunch misjudged their chase, and we had a winner from the early breakaway, 22-year-old Oya Lezanko of Movistar taking full advantage. With Alaphilippe losing over 8 minutes on the day, 4th place on the stage was enough to see Stannard move into the race lead, 7 seconds in front of Matthias Skelmos of Trek Segafredo. The race continues today, but there is no live coverage available until tomorrow, unfortunately. We will have stages 4 and 5 on GCN+, with highlights of the opening 3 stages coming at the start of tomorrow's broadcast. Meanwhile, we are now on to transfer rumour mill season, my favourite time of the year, where I've already mentioned Roglic and Wiebes, but there are also rumours that Attila Valter is set to join Jumbo-Visma next season, as is Dutchman Wilco Kelderman. With Dylan van Baarle and Jan Tratnik also linked to the team, it looks like they'll be strengthening even further next year. Stefan Kung still has a year on his contract at Groupama FDJ, but apparently has a clause within it to allow him to leave early. Trek Segafredo have been named as a possible destination for the European time trial champ, who apparently wants to have more of a leadership role in one-week races and classics. B&B Hotels KTM looks set for an increase in budget next year with funding from the City of Paris. It's a potential destination for Mark Cavendish, who's looking for a new team that will allow him to ride the Tour de France next year in search of that record-breaking 35th stage victory. Right, that is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next week to wrap up the inaugural Tour de France Femmes Avec Zwift. Enjoy all of the racing. Until then, I'll see you next week.